Uh. Hello, we're gonna start right in a couple of minutes. So if everyone could sit down, that'd be great. Thank you, thank you. If everyone could take a seat, that'd be great. We're about to start. We're about to start in a couple of minutes. Thank you, thank you. Apologies for starting a little late. We had some internet troubles, but now we're back. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all. Can you get the pizza? Is it stuck? Are you good? Oh. Oh. You got it. You got it? There you go. All right. Nice. Okay, cool. I'm just going to go ahead and start. Thank you all so much for coming today on a fine evening. My name is Tom Nakata, and I'm one of the hosts today. And I'm the co-founder and CEO of the host company today, which is called Qlay, Qlay.ai. And I just wanted to do a quick self-intro before we jump into the content, which is the amazing panel that we have today with 3 amazing investors. So just to give you a quick rundown of what we do as co-hosts, but I guess a quick self-intro. I'm Tom, I'm the CEO. My co-founder Toku is right there doing the live streaming things. And I did a lot of org strategy things at McKinsey, and before that I have a stats background. And what I do now is I quit the consulting company in 2023. And what I do now is we essentially built a fully automated recruiting platform, and we're focusing on basically overseas engineer hiring, and we're tailoring it to startups so that we make it easy for startups to hire engineers and get things up and running or scale their development team. This basically comes from our experience of trying to bring on board developers from Upwork and Fiverr, and it tends to be a slow process because you have to interview a lot of them. I'm not sure if you guys have ever hired people off of Upwork, but it's a brutal process. So we try to make that easier by leveraging AI as much as possible, and then finding the best person for you and interviewing them and vetting them for the skill sets they have. So for example, if you're trying to hire an AI engineer, we do the screening process, we do the interview process, and then we send you the right profiles in 72 hours. That's basically what we do. I also want to thank the co-sponsor today, which is an accelerator called Open Network Lab. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but the building itself is owned by a company called Digital Garage. They were really early investors in companies like Twitter, so very early VC players. They run an accelerator called Open Network Lab, and they do it once or twice a year, so would be good. They invest around 100,000 for pre-seed. And lastly, we do a lot of these events. We are doing one tomorrow, and then we're doing a pitch night next Monday with many VCs, including Alumni Ventures and Hat Trick Capital. And then in July, we're also co-hosting a podcast session with Plaid co-founder Zach Parrott, and also CEO from Digits, which should be very, very interesting. And then on July 22nd, we're doing another panel about the most recent AI startups. Basically, the last slide, right now we're doing a little campaign where we're offering 400 engineering hours for anyone who books a demo call with us through our website, Qlay.ai, within the next 48 hours, which is a little campaign that we do. But without further ado, I would love to jump into the panel, which is betting on AI. And today we're having three amazing investors. First is Cai Chen. She's an investor at Hat-Trick Capital, which is a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm with 100 million AUM. They invest in agentic, AI, SaaS, robotics, and consumer tech sectors. We also have Clow, is an investment director at Samsung Catalyst Fund, which is Samsung's electronics multi-stage VC firm, VC arm. And then we also have TY, who is an investor at Micron Ventures, and it's a $300 million fund investing beyond semiconductor innovation, like enterprise AI, applications, data and tooling, infra, and more. So if you guys all could please give it up for the panelists today. And if you guys want to... all right. This one's a lot louder. Okay, well, maybe I'll, if you guys could kick it off with a little quick self-intro, that would be amazing.
Okay, I'll get started. Hi everyone, I'm Cai from Hat-Trick Capital. We're a Silicon Valley-based early-stage venture capital focused on pre-seed to Series A. We do a lot of agentic enterprise SaaS and also a little bit on consumer AI as well. I personally lead AML strategy in big tech before joining venture, also focusing on enterprise SaaS and product feature level AI initiatives.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Clow, as Tom mentioned, I work at Samsung Catalyst Fund. We are the in-house venture capital fund for Samsung semiconductor business. So we invest across all layers of the compute stack, everything below the application layer, kind of down to the bare metal. So compute systems, GPUs, AI acceleration. I tend to focus most of my time on kind of the hardware, software, AI stack below the model layer. So if you've heard of companies like Grok or Sambanova, TensTorrent, those are portfolio companies. We do a lot of investing on the networking side as well as I/O. So I think compared to some of the other panelists, I might be the lowest in the stack. But hopefully it's still interesting for all of you.
All right, going up the stack. My name is Tian. I go by TY. From Micron. So our team talks about our investment. We call it like 2 to 3 degrees away from semiconductor, right? So up the stack all the way to applications to dev tooling, and that's what I look at as enterprise AI. So.
Maybe if you guys could touch a little on like what stage you guys invest in most, because how many like startup founders, startup founding team, people who do a lot of investing? Okay. Maybe talk a little bit what stage you guys invest in so that people might have an idea.
Sure. We do pre-seed to Series A early stage investments. Yeah, check sizes $1 to $3 million, but depends on your needs actually. So.
Yeah, we're a little later. We typically go Series A through C. We have gone earlier, we've gone later, but our average check is probably 5 to 10 million. Again, some larger, some smaller. It's kind of the sweet spot.
We're similar to TY, pre-seed to Series A. Check size can be a couple $100K all the way to 3 mil.
Okay, sounds good. Maybe I'll kick it off with, since the title of the panel is betting on AI, maybe I think I'd start with, how do you guys decide which company to essentially bet on. There's obviously a lot of hype around the industry, a lot of things that aren't yet proven. So maybe if you guys could quickly jump into how you typically assess an AI company. You know, what is a proxy that you use as an indicator of potential success as a startup? Any indicators that you guys watch out for?
Yeah, I think my answer will be a little bit different, maybe than some of these two. The type of AI companies that I'm looking at are much more kind of a little bit into the software, but more on the hardware side. But I think what I'll try to do is maybe generalize some points. You know, I think some of the I would say characteristics of a startup that we'll look for. I think it's difficult right now because everything is so fluid, as you all likely know, given how quickly things are changing and evolving. But the types of things that we look for are, I would say, kind of depth and breadth of expertise. So we like to see founders and founding teams that really understand their problem space. And so whether that's a memory system or whether that's a microarchitecture or some sort of optimization in their compiler stack, really having that knowledge, not at a high level, but someone that has some real expertise there. I think the counter argument to that is what we've found to be really successful startups are teams that not only understand their problem space, but then if you think about the core problem, there's sort of these expanding kind of ripple effects that sort of go beyond that. And so sort of like system level design, you might think of it, but sort of how their innovation might play into a larger system and how that might scale up and provide even more value to their customers or to the market. So as an example, if someone's developing a really interesting microarchitecture for a CPU, that's only sustainable and innovative to the point that there's some kind of unique scale-up interconnect or scale-up networking to put that into a data center where it could be implemented for customers, I think. And then I think the last one would be sort of an acknowledgement and a deep understanding of what the challenges are. I hate when I meet founders that are dismissive of challenges. I think it shows either a level of naivete or arrogance, which is not helpful, right? I think we understand it. It's not easy building a company. It's not easy developing new technology. And so I think founders and founding teams that are self-aware and are open to talking about that and how they want to address that, or even how VC money could help them address that, I think really valuable. So
maybe I'll just add on what Yan just said, especially on the idea of impacting the bigger ecosystem around you. I'm sure everybody knows that we're in a very much changing stack right now, right? A lot of things are undefined. So whichever founder has this idea to reshuffle the tech stack or rather restructure the market structure, to me, that's really interesting, right? So this whole idea of MCP, A2A, like this reduction of friction of all different systems talking to each other, that's, to me, structuring the market itself, right? To me, that's like a really strong mode, right? That's one way to think about it. When it comes to the innovation itself, my question to the founders is, as always, if I get your innovation, how are you gonna keep on doing this innovation path, right? And that's a really nuanced question to me. It's like for every single founder, every single startup is different, right? It's just, for example, Qlay, right? I don't know the company very well, so I might be speaking out of terms here, but I'm pretty sure that for you guys, data is very important, right? The talent profiles on your platform, how you do the matching, how do you continuously enrich that data over time? That's probably your mode as well. If you're doing, say, if you're doing like an OS agent, operating system agent, right? Do you have that talent to keep on innovating, and what is that pathway for you? So all of that, what's going to happen 2 to 3 years, 5 years down the road? Questions, to me, that's really important. And it's impossible to find a really good answer that's going to stand for long. But I want to see that depth of thinking in the founders. So.
Yeah, I guess unlike the 2 other panelists, which are really deep in different stack and infra layer, we do a lot of enterprise application layer and also consumer layer. I think 2 trees or thesis we hold internally is one, we're looking for end-to-end solution. which you can actually deliver the results. So like for Tom's company, for example, you are not just doing a point solution, just outreach candidates, things like that. You actually can deliver the candidate all the way from the sourcing the candidate, interview, to actually have the profile in front of the company you are helping with. So we want those companies to actually deliver the results so enterprise customer can actually buy in the results. Another thing I think we're looking at is how deeper in terms of vertical, either B2B customer or consumer, how deeper you understand what they care about. So one sector we're looking at recently, we did internal research, is on like AI trading, AI research. And we basically give all the tools to a couple hedge fund to actually use it. And one thing they got to me is like, they're all trash. A lot, 90%, there's a 1 or 2 probably not. One reason is because even the data or the graph they generate are extremely bad. So one thing we did is they saw the Apple earnings day before and close market data. Actually, they put the wrong data in before and close. So that's actually a really big mistake. We, as a normal person, I'm not really easy to tell, but quant or like hedge fund people, they can tell immediately. So what they care is data accuracy and real-time response. If you go through Manus or ChatGPT, actually a lot of cannot meet these 2 requirements both. So what your target consumer, they really care about in their vertical, that's when we look at application.
Awesome, thank you. I wanted to jump in a little bit about corporate strategy in the context of VC investment, because I feel like we always talk a lot with independent VCs, and we don't get a lot of opportunity, at least I don't, to talk to CVCs. And we have 2 large CVCs here. So maybe if you guys could dive in a little deep into how corporate partnership or strategic partnership and how that comes into play when you guys decide on what kind of verticals or fields to invest in. Does it have an impact, or how does what your parent organization do impact your day-to-day investing strategy?
Ian, do you want to go first? Because I feel like you're more strategic than me.
I would say it depends. So we, as a VC team, like to view ourselves as very independent in terms of our thought. So we're very thematic driven in how we develop our theses. But we obviously exist within the realm of this corporate conglomerate, and so it's a balance. So the way that we look at it is we try to take a structured approach to like the universe of potential investments. And so obviously Samsung, I don't know how familiar you are with the semiconductor business, but we have a large foundry, basically chip manufacturing business, a memory business, as well as a chip design business, which is smaller, but a lot in the sensor and kind of edge type devices. And so we sort of, when we look across the investable universe, I would say a lot of it is sourced by ourselves. Some of it comes through the businesses, and we'll take a look at it as well. We try to categorize companies into a framework of core, adjacent, and disruptive businesses. And so to make it a little more tangible, anything sort of related to memory or memory optimizations would obviously be core. Adjacent would be something that fell in the networking domain, or maybe orchestration, memory, storage, software, right? Where it's not exactly what we're doing right now, but we think the business should be doing that. And then disruptive would be things that are totally beyond what we're doing. And so we spend a lot of time looking at next-gen compute architectures or neuromorphic computing. I spend more time trying to pull us into the software stack in terms of the AI compiler stack and runtimes and things of that nature. Things that we just aren't going to be doing, we don't expect our business to be doing, but we don't really care. And then based on that, we sort of give a little to get a little bit, and we evaluate it differently. So obviously core, there should be a strategic angle. It just makes sense. We don't necessarily, there doesn't need to be a POC for us to invest. There doesn't need to be an engagement, but ideally that would be a good outcome. Whereas on the disruptive and the adjacent side, we view it actually much more as like a pure play financial VC investment. And so to the extent that there is an engagement, that's added upside for us, but frankly, we don't care. And In some instances, we prefer for there not to be, because we don't want the business to get sort of crushed in the very large corporate structure.
I think Ian just answered for me as well. So for us, I think there's like a dual focus approach. The financial side of things obviously is very important. The strategic side of things is as well. To me, the stuff I'm looking at, enterprise AI, is less so Micron specific. It's more about large companies, what do you need, right? Now, for me, it's like, the first thing I would want the founder to show is this is financially viable, there's totally scalable, right? And I think that's almost the basis of being a good company. Doesn't matter if you're strategic or not, right? If you have that strategic value for the company behind me, if you're not financially viable, how long do I get to have that strategic value, right? So that's my way of thinking about it. And also because we have this mandate to, at least for half the team, to look at what I said, 2 to 3 degrees away from the core business. So that kind of stuff, to Ian's point, we're approaching the same way. It's like we don't have to have some sort of BU buying or POC to even start thinking about investment. But if there's a way for Micron to use you, then why not, right? And same thing with Samsung. We're like tens of thousands of people, big company. So we have all the opportunities and all the problems and all the issues. So whichever startups that come in and solve it for us, then why not, right? So,
just out of curiosity, I guess that's you guys' perspective, but from the startup's perspective, do startups come to you and say, like, we want you guys to invest in us because we want to use your, like, this specific resource or this specific things that you guys have, or we want to design something together? Is that something common, or is it like not as common as people think?
yeah, so I guess it depends on the archetype of the startups, right? If you were playing within the ecosystem that we're in, then there are really only 3 memory leading players in the world, Samsung, us, and other companies, right? So they probably approach all 3 of us. So that's that archetype. And then when it comes to enterprise AI startups, we're a decent logo for them to have. You know, I call like our logo, if the startup gets to be a vendor of us, it's like a flagship logo for them to go on and say, hey, I get to work with this giant company, right? My stuff works. So yes, to startups is one way to think about like what's the meaning of our investment. So.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think that's right. I think many startups approach us because they, want foundry services, or they need some sort of memory system as part of their solution. One area where I poke up, particularly in the software and the application layer, is on the use of AI for EDA tools. So EDA, like companies like Synopsys and Cadence, that provide software for chip designers. And so there's a breadth of startups right now that are just sort of kind of coming out, that are developing basically software tools to automate that, and, or to enhance the design and verification process. And so part of the way that I'm selling it to Samsung is that, yes, this is not part of our business, but this is a tool that we can implement that would be very valuable across our design teams. And so it works that way too.
Cool, thank you. I kind of want to move on to asking a little bit about defensibility or any particular layer of AI that you guys really enjoy investing in, because I think this is a rare panel where we have, all the way from chips to cloud to infrastructure to even application, even consumer application. Cai, I think you're more familiar with those things. And within that, different layers of AI investment, and I'm sure you guys have your own positions as an investor and your personal take on where you're bullish, but is there a particular layer of AI investment that you guys are particularly bullish in personally or as an investor, and what kind of defensibility do you want to see in those particular layers? Maybe start with you, Cai.
What's that go from application to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I think for in terms of defensibility, for B2B and consumer, it's slightly different nowadays. I think consumer is pretty hard. You can see like it really to copy and paste to do the same thing, right? I would say the first thing is actually capture the user mind. So I got this question actually the other day, like, I really like granola. I'm not sure if you guys use it. Kind of new way of doing note-taking. People ask like,
what is it called?
Granola. Granola, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
So the way they're doing note-taking is like, yeah, it's really good. Yeah. So during the time, you can actually make your own notes during the meeting. And after that, they will combine the transcript and your notes together to give you a really structured summary. People asking like, okay, granola, great. I can copy the same way as granola does. Technically, you can, but granola actually already there capture the user mind. So even you have another copycat called copycat called I don't know, like not granola, like yogurt or something like that. But people in their mind, they already know granola as the first one to do it in this way, to actually understand user workflow in this way. So capture user's mind, be the first one. Either first product or first person to do this in consumer side is actually really important. So that's the reason you see all the founder out there doing marketing on Twitter, everywhere. Capture user mind is probably your defensibility for consumer app. For B2B, actually, it's right now, I think it's slightly tricky for new founders. We see a lot of existing founder or serial entrepreneur actually doing better job. One is they understand how to do enterprise sales, how to do integration with existing data system, and how to build an end-to-end solution customized for enterprise. So I guess for B2B, it's not your technical defensibility. It's more how you work with your enterprise customer to really deep integrate it with their system and build the solution end-to-end for them. That's kind of my take for application layer.
Defensibility, I think, is a very interesting question, particularly in the age of AI. I think it's increasingly, regardless of what layer of the stack that you're in, whether you're B2B, whether you're B2C, given the advancements in AI, I think it's increasingly hard to sort of find unique defensibility. I mean, there's obviously, many of you are probably familiar with Hamilton Helmer's 7 powers, network economies, scale economies, network effects, cornered resource, process power, branding, things like that.
It's a must-to-read book in our firm.
yeah. If you listen to the Acquired podcast too, Dave and Ben, they worship Hamilton Helmer. I think that's a great framework, but I think increasingly it's sort of, I wouldn't say that it's thrown out the window, but it's very hard. And so I think one of the fundamental shifts in the age of AI, particularly as we move to agentic AI and the speed at which things are working is I think of there's sort of 5 things that I kind of think about. The first 3 are all self-reinforcing. This isn't rocket surgery, but I sort of focus on this as just straight speed, right? Like how quickly you can move, I think is incredibly important. It's always been important as a startup, but I think now that given that the barriers of entry are increasingly lowered because of these AI tools, like how fast, what's your velocity is incredibly important. How quickly you can pivot if you hit a wall. Scale, which is obviously related to that, how quickly you are growing the business. And then customer stickiness, to the extent that you can get into a customer and stay there, right? You're not churning. I think that those 3 things kind of reinforce themselves. One thing that I personally hate, not hate, but when you see founders kind of posting all these kind of customer announcements on LinkedIn, you don't really know if that's true or if that's not, right? That might just be a POC, that could just be NRE dollars. And so it's just, that's one metric for success that I don't pay attention to for founders is what's their kind of LinkedIn presence. And then I think on the hardware side, what I look at is kind of the classic Clayton Christensen framework of, is your technological innovation sustaining versus disruptive, right? Like, is this an incremental change? Is this is this 2 to 3x, or is this 5 to 10x, or is this 100x, right? And if you're 10 to 20, that's great, but if you're telling me you can get to 100, 50 to 100, that's amazing. And then I'd say the second thing is, I think we talked about it previously, is what is the system level implication of your technology? And I think on the hardware side, you can think about it as a system level, but I think on the software side, the way you can think about it is aggregation theory. I don't know how many of you read Ben Thompson, but aggregation theory, like right now, we don't know where the value is going to be captured, right, along these value chains. And so to the extent that you can create a choke point or some sort of like real value, some sort of platform, I think that is like really key.
I just love how Tom framed that question of talking about layers, because both Tom and I used to work for this consulting firm, and we're very good at drawing architectural diagrams, different layers. And I guess to Ian's point, the layers of this tech stack is almost like it's changing so fast, it's unstable, right? So I actually just did this last week. I drew an architectural diagram with layers on my board in my office, and I put a remark on the bottom. I said, this is valid for 2 months until it's not. Right? So I sent it to my team, and everybody's like, sure, like we don't know what's going on with all these layers. And I think when I think about these layers, maybe when it comes to defensibility, maybe I'll use one example. So I'm obsessed this few months of this layer that I called memory augmentation to AI systems, right? So it's basically saying all of your fancy ChatGPTs, they don't remember, right? If they don't remember, they can't personalize. If they can't personalize, they can't embed deeply into your life, right? So that true AI companionship or the true AI coworker, or maybe in a doomsday scenario, the AI girlfriend, boyfriend, it wouldn't happen, right? So memory for AI to me is very important. Now, if we use that topic as maybe one example to talk about defensibility, sure, first thing, the defensibility is making it work, right? The system with your AI, a memory management module attached to it is able to remember. That's the first thing. Now, if a startup come up to me and say, what if I create an AI memory management system that's portable, right? That can, if you plug into different AI systems, then the system reacts to the way that I want to talk to it. And to me, that's defensibility, because what that does is like, it shifts the center of gravity from models to AI, to memory, to data, right? So that, to me, is one example of defensibility, right? If I push that narrative even further, we're talking about like memory software now. If your memory software can someday meet my memory hardware from Micron, then you're talking about entirely different defensibility, right? So this is me daydreaming, but I think like defensibility question for every layer, every topic is different. It's like you want the founder to like free thinking and just like talk about visions, and you think about whether that's possible, whether it's really defensible from that standpoint. So.
Can I add one point? Yeah. I think I want to mention consumer talk a lot about capture user mind and kind of relate to marketing side, but I'm a product person. I lead like AML strategy in product side a lot. I still feel it's not anything different than the previous tech wave or previous like way we did product. It's still the same. Like if your product is good to use, like Grandona, people like it, and you feel it's seamless user experience, you just naturally have that defensibility. People will stick to your product. Your retention will be good. So nothing, I don't think I change anything about this fundamental philosophy. That's something I would really want to emphasize on if you're building an application.
Thank you. AI girlfriend. Doomsday scenario. Speaking of doomsday scenario, have you guys read this thing called AI 2027? By any? Okay, maybe I was the last person to read it. Have you guys heard of this blog called AI? Okay, if you guys haven't read it, it's incredible, incredibly sad. I mean, okay. They give two endings, right? They give, yeah.
One is sad. One is, I think, overly optimistic.
There you go. But I guess in that similar context, there's a lot of risks in this. Obviously, regulation. I don't know if you can call that a risk, or maybe from an investment or development perspective, it could be considered as a risk. There's also a risk around compute scarcity. I mean, that also kind of depends on how you define it. There's also a risk around concentration of talent. Meta's paying 10 million for 100 million for any AI researcher, or was it 10 million? I think it's 100 million sign-on bonus, which is crazy. But I guess there's a lot of risks
from an investment perspective that can happen to a startup, an AI startup at any point. Is there any certain risks that kind of keeps you up at night, or it's some risk that you always mention in an investment meeting saying, okay, like how are you gonna overcome this potential risk? Like what's that one or two risks that you guys always think about?
I have maybe 3 or 4 that I think I sort of consistently think about. One, and I think this is true on the hardware and both the software side, but more so than any other moment in history, there are massive incumbents, a la big tech, that sit here and in Silicon Valley, and that's sort of coupled with the increasing importance of sort of just scale and like money to throw at the problem. To give you an example, like the 2025 projected CapEx from the hyperscalers is $330 billion, which is just an unfathomable amount of money to be deploying for these systems. And so, you know, for hardware players, for accelerator players, things like that, the question is always, okay, but can this displace the NVIDIA sort of system level solution, right? Can this get designed in to one of these companies without them, you know, sort of doing their own custom silicon effort? And on the software side, I'm curious to see if we're going to see similar dynamics to the streaming wars. So it was not that long ago when you know, there were companies that were developing streaming platforms and as a product, as a business, and Amazon just came in and basically offered it for free as a basically a service as part of the broader platform. And so I think the same dynamic could play out on the application and the model layer, right? You've seen OpenAI just recently acquired Windsurf. And so to what extent are these model providers going to increasingly creep into the application layer, I think is something to think about. The second one is more of, I think, just a cyclical risk, which is we've seen a massive proliferation in startups across, I think, all domains. Those are generally followed by massive waves of consolidation. And so who's going to survive? Why are they going to survive? What sort of defensibility do they have, right? We don't know. So that's one thing that I think a lot about. The third one, I think it sort of plays a little bit in the talent piece, but I think it goes with the dynamism of the environment, is that when I sort of hit on this is you don't really exactly know where the value is going to accrete to right now. In the same way that you didn't know that the value was going to accrete to Google because of search, you didn't realize that the value was going to accrete to certain mobile platforms and mobile apps, to the the Apple iPhone, the Apple the iStore, so the App Store. So kind of understanding which layer you should be focused on and which companies, I think, it's very difficult. So I don't think it's necessarily anything specific to companies, but I think it's just the overall dynamics. And then lastly, having an incredibly stable administration in Washington, D.C. right now is something that keeps me up at night. I think from the regulatory perspective, I think it's probably more favorable for tech than it's been in the last 4 years. But just the uncertainty around, what the Fed is going to be forced to do, the uncertainty around tariffs. We were talking before about, startups that we invest in that have business in China, and is that going to be some sort of issue? And, there's just a lot of, I think, question marks. So, yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm investing more earlier stages. When I think about this risk question, I'm more thinking about the team and the founder. And I have full respect to anybody that wants to do a startup. Because if you think about a startup, when it comes to risks, there's literally 200 ways to die in 2 months' time, right? So when I talk to a founder, I'm more leaning towards getting closer to the founder compared to my VC peers. Getting closer to my VC peers, it's these are to me you're a hero, right? Even if I don't invest in you, you're pouring your life into this. So this is a risk game by itself. Now, going back to the question, I think that tech giants versus startup question is number one for me, because if you think about the so-called incumbents, right? They're not that old. They're 20, 15, 10 years old, really. Some of them are founder-led. Some of them are just innovating like crazy, right? So this is not I don't know how to say it. This is not having like legacy semiconductor companies as legacy companies in the early 2000s, right? So they don't really have that big problem when it comes to innovating. So that to me is like, if you're building something against the giants, if they're not eating your pie, then to me it's risky because that means your pie is not attractive. If they're eating your pie, then to me it's a risk. It's like your pie is gonna be taken away, right? So whenever I think about talking to a founder, it's like, okay, tell me like how do you productize this and how much people love it? Right? Show me that, please. And then we'll say maybe you in 2 years' time you become an acquisition target, right? For the tech giants because you move so fast, right? Another way to think about risks is really coming down to the founder and the team. And I asked for that, I call it the self-awareness in the founder to know exactly what you're missing today and maybe in 6 months' time as well, right? Because it's almost impossible to find a founder that's good at everything, right? So, but if you don't know what you're missing, right, then to me it's a red flag. But yeah.
I guess we all talk about incumbents, like tech giant. I think I will separate them into two parts. One is, like you said, exists for 20 years, like previous tech giant, like Apple, Google, Amazon, etc. They actually move really fast. Like Google reshifting the whole DeepMind team. I know people working really hard there, working 20 hours, not 20 hours a day, like probably 15 hours a day, something like that. Apple also reorg. So just be mind how fast this company are moving right now. But another type of giant we call foundation model lab. Like OpenAI is 10K company, 10K employee right now. They're not small startup. So anything close to the foundation models layers, fundamental capability actually pretty dangerous. This is probably not a good example, but I think even Cursor have a fierce competition from cloud code, from the Anthropic cloud code. I heard a lot of portfolio company or developers shifting from Cursor to cloud code for better experience. So anything really close to foundation models, fundamental capability, easier for them to do. Another example in my mind is search flight tickets, operator, something like that. So anything really easy for them to do, you have to think about it. For them, it's probably just a couple days development, they can get it, or it's really tied to their fundamental business, like Anthropic really tied to developer experience, develop tool, right? So it's making a lot of sense. They do cloud code. Yeah, but that's something we look at when we're thinking about your, I guess, the risk for founders to do in this era.
I think that point, what you just mentioned, was so important. I think these foundational labs, they don't even need to integrate it into their own business to sort of kill you. So one quick example that was brought up earlier actually was MCP, right? MCP, I think 6 months ago, companies like LangChain and a lot of these RAG companies like Pinecone were like super hot, right? And valuations were going through the roof. But now with MCP, it's a fundamental question, right? And that was developed by Anthropic. They decided to open source it, and they just spun it out to the ecosystem. And it could have impacts on an entire class of companies. Right now, you can make the argument that RAG is better for certain workloads, right? When there's more unstructured data, or maybe it's more local to you, and MCP is better as an API. You would have kind of a dual layer MCP and RAG on top of that, where you standardize the data. But it's still, these companies that were fundamentally sort of really hot AI infra tool companies 6 months ago are now sort of having a lot of existential questions. And Anthropic it's only because they just open sourced, basically a tool. So I think it's an interesting and dangerous time if you're really close to the foundational labs.
I think this is a really good segue to my last question. And after my last question, I'll open it up to the floor and see if anybody else wants to ask a question. But as also a founder, I'm always curious about exit paths for startups. And are we starting to see exit paths for the most recent wave of AI companies, right? I think when these startups founders found a startup, they always say, oh, we're always going to be around forever and be the next Amazon, Meta, Apple, whatever. But we're slowly starting to see these pretty new AI companies get acquired. You know, Windsurf, obviously, and you know, Perplexity is in talks. So I've heard. I don't know the details. Maybe. But if you don't get acquired, and you know, you just mentioned that you know people are switching from Cursor to another platform. You know, are you going to risk losing to a competitor, or are you going to, you know, exit? I feel like there's a lot of different options, but I guess the question is, you know, are we slowly starting to see I guess like for now the best way for these startup companies to exit? Like, is selling yourself the right thing to do today, or you know, do you still want these startups to aim to become the next, you know, big tech? Like, what's the current hypothesis on the right way to exit, I guess is the question. Or are we starting to see that?
Yeah, I think this is the flip side of the last question, right? Last question is a little heavy. Now we're talking about exits and really cashing out. So yes, there's definitely a lot of exits happening. I guess what you don't see in the news is a lot of acqui-hire, right? So a lot of the big players like Google and NVIDIA is buying smaller companies in the $20 to $100 million range just for the people, right? So if you are a founder that's of that caliber, so maybe that's something for you to think about, right? Whether there's data around it, because these deals are so secretive, you kind of don't see them happening. But if you go on LinkedIn and if you, you know, watch out for some of the influencer type of employees at places like NVIDIA, you look at what they did before, it's like a startup, right? So that's a hint, right? So if you are that kind of founder, right, if you want to build something and you build yourself up and you say, I'm going to sell myself and my company for a couple dozen $1 million, so that's happening. There's also big size acquisitions that's happening as well, right? So needed by the mother company. That's kind of different from what they were before. Maybe just one example, right? So a couple months back, Qlay bought Weights and Biases for, I think it's $1.2 billion. When I saw that news last month, I'm like, oh, what is this compute company buying a dev tooling for? And then I look at this news today. There's like this piece of news coming out of Qlay saying they're releasing this new AI platform tooling, right? It's they call it, I think it's called infrastructure event tracking, right? So they basically remoted Weights and Biases into this infrastructure tooling, right, that helps you deploy AI systems and workloads faster. So to me, it's like highly strategic acquisition also happening. So I think that from that angle, the lesson learned for me, if I'm a founder, is like, how flexible can you position what you built, right, to fit in different value traps of different kinds of company that opens up the range of potential acquirers for you. So, I mean, my thinking on this question is this is great. It's a great time. Exits are happening.
Yeah, I would say I'm aligned with that. I think there's sort of two backdrop factors to consider. Is, you know, from 2018 to 2021, we were in the zero interest rate policy regime, right, where you just saw a massive run up in funding rounds and merger and investment activity, which fell off a cliff in 21, 22, 23. And so it's sort of only up from here, I think, is the bottom line. There's a great deck that I would encourage you guys all to go flip through. I don't know if you've heard of the hedge fund / venture investor Co2, but they do a big conference every year, and it just happened. It's called East Meets West, and they released about a 100-page deck, and very easy to get through. It covers both public and private markets, and some of the later slides are on venture activity, both on the IPO and the M&A side. And the bottom line is, you know, we're starting to see green shoots, and so I think on an annualized basis, IPO activity right now is expected to close at about 230 billion this year. Even at the half-year point, so let's say 115 billion, that's already more than 2023, 2022, and 2021. And then on the M&A side, it's going to be close to annualizing, I believe it's like at 120 billion. And that's already, so if you take that half, like 65 billion, that's more than the last 3 years combined on M&A activity. And so I think in terms of exits, it's looking pretty good. I think that's one thing that, you know, in the sort of policy landscape, and I'm not going to be taking a political view here, one thing during the Biden administration that it was more difficult for a lot of these large companies, especially in the tech domain, to be making these types of acquisitions. And I think now they're sort of being much more waved through or more open to it. So I think that's positive. And then I think, we are seeing more recently some acqui-hires, which is interesting. And so that's another exit. I mean, I don't know how many of you went or heard of the AMD Advancing AI event. It's their kind of annual event that's akin to NVIDIA GTC. And Lisa, the CEO, said that in the last year they've made 25 strategic investments in companies kind of across the stack. One of the more recent ones, they acqui-hired a digital and memory compute accelerator company that we had looked at, Untethered AI, based out of Toronto. And then, I mean, the scale acquisition is not an investment, it's basically an acqui-hire, right? Just Mark Zuckerberg is desperate to play catch up and will do anything for some sort of news cycle attention to get people to pay attention to Meta and Llama. And so we're starting to see it. I think it's a very long-winded answer to say it's becoming more favorable, for sure.
I think this is a pretty interesting question in that, like, the whole financial liquidity market right now. Actually, the data point you give is kind of counterintuitive because my intuition is the IPO market is not doing very great. And you saw a lot of companies stay private all the way to Series E, Series G, some of them, and then valuation extremely high. And there are some AI companies, when they started, like seed or Series A, they're unicorn already. So the extremely high valuation, it's really hard to see the path going to IPO, to my opinion. So one thought, I think recently I'm thinking is potentially the secondary liquidity market will be hot. You already see the trend, like people are trading this is early stage AI companies shares on the secondary liquid market. So that's a potential going forward. It's not an exit for the founders, but it's probably a way to kind of solve the existing liquidity issue in the pre-IPO market. Another thing is, I think for acquisition, that's not a bad thing, but it really depends on what type of product, what type of company you're building. Like a lot of acquisition are acqui-hire or your like tech stack really fit into that company's like the overall like spectrum. I saw there's a couple example like Voyage AI get acquired by MongoDB. Actually, there's really good synergy there. And a lot of, I guess for founders, you have to think about at the first day, what's your end goal? There are some founders, I know actually the first day, they already thinking about strategic acquisition going forward. And they think about potential like kind of acquisition partners, and they start that conversation actually pretty early. But there are some founders like, no, I want to build a company all the way goes bigger, right? I have that mind. So when they founderizing, they actually avoid strategic investor to be the lead investor. So that really depends on your personal vision and which steps you want to going forward. I guess that's something I think I will tie back to founder themselves, your own vision, and you have to play strategic when you're fundraising to kind of against your vision.
Cool. Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. Well, I was gonna open it up to the audience, but there's one guy who has his hands up already.
Test. Okay. So let's going back to defensibility. It's interesting you were mentioning before, like what keeps me up at night for the Washington story. For me, what keeps me up at night is how fast. So I'm personally on application level, so I actually swap models very quickly. But it keeps me up at night on how well I can test what model, underlying model or models, because I use more than one, performs better with the latest version of my application. So that's something interesting that like, I'm still trying to find the answer. I'm still tweaking. I'm still kind of like, as much as there are eval for models, what is the comparable eval for application layer on how best to use a model? I'm curious if you have any, just kind of like heard anything from any company you work with on when they switch quickly between models. You know, you go from one version of Gemini, one version of OpenAI, and so others. What they notice that works or doesn't work to test what models works best for them.
I'll give one thing that I do here. We're seeing a lot more, this is on the AI for EDA side. Even compared to a year ago, it's obviously shifted to agentic, and now it's shifting to multi-agentic type platforms and multi-LLM type platforms. So people are now, rather than feeling the need to switch across one or the other, they're actually integrating inputs across the different tools from multiple models. So based on which one excels on certain things. And so as an example, in the chip design process, there are certain parts of the design stage and the verification stage and certain kinds of simulations that you'll run where certain players have found that XYZ model works actually best. They get the best results from that agent. So they sort of stick with it. So rather than maybe switching back and forth, they've been able to kind of disaggregate the workflow and be able to integrate multiple models across that to work like seamlessly. So I think that's one of the benefits of MCP as well, right? Is it makes that interoperability and that heterogeneous compute much easier across your workflows. But I think you probably have more commentary on the application layer.
Yeah, so just make sure I catch the question correctly. So you're talking about like if for application builder, should you switch between different models to try the best result, right?
Yeah, I think right now it's a lot of very like manual labor, kind of like, okay, there is O3, let's test O3 with the same like proprietary data and how it behaves, and like you kind of like run those tests. I think there's still some immaturity in how this is done. And I think like probably in the next 6 to 18 months, we will see some sort of like best practice get more standardized. I'm curious just kind of like to see what's around so I can learn from it, you know?
I guess for that question, one type back to what Ian said, we do see some companies actually use multiple model in multiple steps, especially they have more than one agent. For different use cases, that might fit better to their use case specifically. Another thing I would say for also in terms of switching costs, sometimes and the accuracy you want to reach, if it's good enough to meet your customer feedback or customer requirements, there's no really like hard needs right now for switching the model, especially a lot of foundation models capability are really close to each other if you try all their different API. But
yeah, so I think that's interesting because like the more I'm using them and more I'm realize that they're start deviating a little bit. Like I'm actually going back and forward between using a Sonar with Perplexity, Photo Mini with OpenAI, and I'm testing more Gemini. And I'm actually see like in the data that deviates enough that kind of like trickles application differences. And my fear that keeps me up at night that this deviation is gonna just keep increasing in the next 6 months. So like right now, you're right, it doesn't notice much between them, but my fear is like it's gonna be so wide the difference in 6 months that then you have to be very careful in how you move between them. That's just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I guess one for foundation model layer, most company I know pretty stick to one foundation model. If also like, I guess how much you believe in that lab, right? We personally don't really encourage you switching too much. The more you integrate with their current ecosystem, especially you work with their dev team, the more it's actually harder to switch going forward. So be minded to choose which foundation model you want to work with is important. But that's on the foundation model side. On other side, like voice AI model, et cetera, you see actually a lot of open source model getting better and better. So you see new model coming out actually gets better. So in those sectors, you probably be mind to more see new things coming out, and you probably will switch between new voice model to see which one perform best. And if you work with enterprise customer, they probably require you to use open source model and deploy locally. So that really depends on your customer requirements and also your switching cost to switch between labs. Most of our portfolio work with Sonnet, and they actually really get deeply involved with Anthropic dev team, dev relation team. I don't have opinion about that. It's just more, I think, which foundation model team you personally feel is the best to achieve the end results of your application.
Oh, okay.
Hear me? Oh, there. Thanks so much for all the insights and answering the questions. I have a very specific question about the future of VCs, because as you mentioned, like there is an exponential growth in the number of startups. So that means that there is more need for resources. But there is also some, I would call it for now, noise around some VCs that they are migrating from investing to acquiring business to transform those business with AI. So my question is like, how do you see evolving the VC industry in the upcoming years due to all these improvements in AI and the possibility of them to transform industries themselves?
Maybe just let me clarify that question. You're talking about like VCs turning more into PE business model, like buying companies and being hands-on. That's a very interesting thought. I'm not sure about that happening myself, because I think it goes against the definition of VC investment, right? Because if you're investing as a VC, you're looking for highly scalable, like 100, 1,000x returns, and that's betting on the founder and the team that's being that unique, right? If you are that unique, then you should have done it yourself, right? So as saying like I'm gonna invest in a company and sort of be that activist, I'm not sure if that's like a major trend. I heard about people doing like this single person PE shops coming into businesses and flip businesses, but to me that's still private equity. I do see a very like maybe tangentially related trend that's VCs becoming more empowering to their startups, right? This is like what they call a platform VC, right? So you have like hundreds of people in the VC firm with like operational advisory partners coming in to tell you how to do marketing, right? How to teach you how to structure a 100 people organization, right? So I think that's really a trend that's happening in the market. I think that's deeply valuable as well, right? So yeah, so that's where I think the industry might be going.
Yeah, I mean, there's really strong opinions about this. There's very different schools of thought based on who you talk to and what firm they're at, right? So I think the model that you're espousing is basically like the A16Zs or the General Catalysts of the world. You know, I think the sort of opposite side of that would be like the benchmark capitals of the world. So Bill Gurley, the guy who kicked off Travis Kalanick from the Uber board, they're much more activist, usually very constructive, except in that situation, and have no interest in going into PE. You know, to me, it seems a bit like a naked fee grab. You know, VCs, I don't know how familiar you are with the economic structure, but there's typically a management fee and an incentive fee, 2 and 20, 2% of AUM and then 20% of performance. And the more assets you have under your management, the more management fee that you get, right? And so I think there's a creative tension. There's sort of like a creative tension here, I think, within the industry of like, where is this going to go? Because if it goes too much towards kind of just the asset aggregator model, right, then it's kind of the incentive to really drive returns, right? Previously, VCs were you invest in a portfolio of 10 companies, we have 8 or 9 failures, one of them is a grand slam, right, and it was very spiky. Now it's kind of, are they now incentivized to hit singles and doubles, and then they're not really looking for disruptive innovation, and it's sort of just an asset management business. And so I think both can exist. I think it'll just sort of, you'll start to see a little bit more of a disaggregation of the types of players that you'll see. I think one thing that I'm paying attention to, I think more closely in terms of the VC business model is how VC and private equity investing is impacted by AI tools in the very same way that other knowledge work industries are going to be impacted. And I think it's short-sighted and closed-minded to think that VC won't also be impacted by this, right? And Anthropic released a paper, I believe it was in April, which I would encourage all of you to read. They started something called the AI Economic Index, and they released a paper where they had taken a number of different queries from Claude over an X percent, I forget, over a few month period, And they analyzed the types of tasks that were being done, and they tracked it to the types of work that were being done and in the industries. And so to kind of try to see to what extent was AI being used to augment sort of human employees, or to what extent was it being used to sort of replace human employees or tasks. And at the moment, it's sort of equally split based on their research. If you talk to Dario, obviously he's much more alarmist than someone like Sam is. There's a company called Mechanize AI now, which is out there, which is basically saying outright that they want to replace all human labor. So I think that is going to be something that it's a bit of a snake eating its own tail with the VC industry as well, is how do these AI tools start to shift what we do and how we work.
Yeah, I think one thing I agree with what Ian add is really depends on what VC firm you're talking about. Actually, so great you mentioned this question. I actually pay attention in this kind of things for a while, just thinking about why all big players are getting into the private equity side, right? I talk with people from GC recently about this, but basically the one answer she gave to me is like, when you manage $10 billion, it's just not really impossible. You put all in the early stage, and your return would not be that good as well. So it's kind of naturally when they goes to multi-stage all the way to private equity side. I guess that's one reason. Another reason is I've seen, especially in this agentic SaaS wave, there's both on startup side and also with, I forgot which venture is play this game. They just directly acquire a previous like business company or like last central SaaS company, and then transform them into AI efficient model. I also know another VC in supply chain area trying to do this himself. For them, they understand the business, the operation, and they know how technology works. They can just easily transfer the existing company to boost the revenue. So I guess that's the second incentive for them to do this business model. But still, I think it's just one sector of the player is doing this. There's still a lot of venture firm only focus on early stage, and they're still trying to get that alpha. I don't really know, like, this is two sector when they encounter in the future. You acquire a company and make it AI first, efficient or whatever, or like startup trying to eat existing SaaS world, things like that. It's hard to me to make that judgment right now, which way works better. But I would keep encouraged to keep close look at the acquisition model, especially those company where startup founders acquire and make it AI efficient. That's a thing I heard from both some VC are doing this and also some founder are doing this as well.
Maybe I'll take one more if there's it.
Yeah, I have a question here.
Oh,
Thanks,
someone
Clow.
already has a mic. Ah, there you are. Okay.
What you guys have told us is very different from what I've been hearing. Never get into chip technology, don't even get into understanding the depth of hardware. But software industry is a lot easy to scale if you already have an underlying hardware which works, but we're missing a lot of opportunities. So opening up doors for putting more innovation in terms of on the chip and running the AI models on the chip is going to really scale up things. And that is not happening right now because there are a lot of general GPU IOs available where the memory design can really put a floating point numbers till 128-bit. But if you really look at the other hardware, most of them are cut off at 32-bit. So we would like to see that the investment opens up so that we can directly start modifying at the chip level, and start implementing AI models at the chip level, because that can open up a big data. And we're just not talking about programming the chip itself. We're trying to introduce new modules because there has not been much innovation that has been connected to electronic modules to the software development part. A good example is exception handling. Exception handling was always introduced to software industry maybe 15 to 20 years back, but now we're hearing that that can be produced to the hardware. Also, hardware can kick off exception handling. In the same way, the huge scope for generating random numbers. Random numbers are mostly generated using software tools, but we're looking at modules that can generate those random numbers at the hardware concept. So my question is again, with my startup, and there are a lot of other startups, we would definitely like to interface between the software, all the great technology that is happening right now, but bring it on the chip level. So this a good example is the sensor readers. If we can enhance the sensor readers, it really opens up doors for image processing, because right now most of your AI is based on GPTs. They are text processed, but image processing is needed. So I would like to ask you guys, if someone is going to go so deep that they can really get into a chip level where you can modify things at a comparator levels, you're modifying things at a lot of filter processing, but right there implementing AI.
Can you just repeat the
Okay.
question part?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
It's been a long panel, and I haven't had a sip of water, so I'm a little. Can you just repeat
Sure.
the last question bit?
If we are a startup that is actually developing a hardware-based, processor-based product and also software product, would the investment be opening up for them? We'd like to create innovation and disruption in the chip level.
The innovation in the chip layer?
Yes, so it's like bringing a lab on a chip kind of technology.
Can someone help me out by any chance?
Okay. We would like to create a specialized hardware and also software, but to build that new hardware, we have to really remodel, reconfigure the way the sensor technology is right there today.
So is your question about like custom silicon opportunities for startups
Yes.
to develop custom silicon?
Yes.
I mean,
So 90% of the RGB sensors, photo sensors are coming from Sony. There's no other option.
I mean, I guess the question, the question's a little bit muddled to me. I'll try to the extent possible to answer your question. I mean, I think there's been massive innovation at the hardware layer over the last 10 years since the sort of liftoff of parallel thread execution within NVIDIA GPUs. I think you're seeing increasingly flexible types of GPU accelerators. So whether that's VLIW over at Grok, or you see data flow architectures, which are able to compile the workloads in advance, and then on an asynchronous basis, out of order instruction execution in a way that's much more efficient and faster for inference. As it comes to, I think you were mentioning, something that edged on computational bio and sensor related things. It's a question of scalability, right, for these custom ASIC players. I don't know. I know that on the edge, there's a lot of innovation that's happening right now for neuromorphic sensing. And so rather than there being like constant ongoing compute, there be some sort of kind of synapse type behavior where then that would then trigger the compute processing for like autonomous driving to sense around the vehicle. So I think that's a big thing. I don't know, for specific types of workloads, in the computational biospace, there's obviously always been FPGAs, which are highly programmable, but your problem there is it's going to be much slower to execute, right? Because the clock speeds are much lower with these functional units. So we are seeing, I think, maybe to generalize your point and abstract away a little bit, I think one discussion that we have internally a lot is, to what extent is it valuable to have a highly specific microarchitecture for specific workloads versus what is the value of having a very generalized architecture? So as an example, Etched AI, which you may have heard of, is developing a chip which is highly specialized for LLM workloads, right? But what happens if LLMs, so for example, in the computational biospace, you don't necessarily need an LLM, you probably need a multimodal type AI model. You probably need some sort of vision. Maybe you're running a convolutional neural network, right? You can't run that on that silicon, right? And so there are companies like Grok or Cerebras which have a much more generalizable architecture, which can handle different types of models. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think it comes to that crux of how specialized do you want your hardware versus how generalized you want it. And I think ultimately there's still going to be value to having a very generalizable microarchitecture that is able to support various types of workloads other than transformer-based workloads.
And also image processing.
I think we've been running this panel for an hour, so I'm gonna have to cut this here. But maybe Ian might be generous enough to stick around for a couple of minutes. I'm not too sure. But I'm gonna cut this here. Thank you all so much for the panel, and thank you, panelists. If you could give them a round of applause, that would be great. And just one ask: is it cool if we take a picture in front of here? And Justin, do you want to get up on stage? We're just gonna take one picture with the panelists, and if you guys could be the back, that would be phenomenal.